Hey folks, I want to briefly touch on three things. I'd like to talk about the article, I'd like to talk about the upcoming project, and I want to talk a little bit about getting started. So let's get started. First, I want to outline the article for you. I know that that article was a bit of a beast. Um, and I want to hand you the major claims of the article because these are the sorts of ideas that you can begin considering as you get into your own project. In the article, obviously, we have Langdon Winner building the case that objects have agendas, and I have that as this first claim, right? That objects themselves are agendized. And the reason that I want you to think about this is because it's actually counterintuitive to how we often think about objects. So the example is that we think of a hammer, as a tool that we can use in any way we want to use it. And the point that Langdon Winner is making is that we can't necessarily use artifacts in any way we want to use them, that they themselves are metaphorically part of the conversation. And he then explains that sometimes the agendas that exist in these artifacts are actually put there by the creators of the artifacts themselves. And so that first example about the overpasses in Long Island, New York is the perfect example of that, right? That the agenda is built in by the creator. He then moves to this more nuanced conversation that despite the fact that a creator may build an agenda in, the artifact itself, independently of the creator, may also have its own agenda. And so now the agendas that exist within an artifact aren't necessarily intentional. They can just exist independently. Later in the article, the conversation gets even more complex, and there's two big claims that he makes there. The first one is that the artifacts that we invent are also compatible with certain arrangements of power. And that's where he has that conversation about nuclear energy and the necessity for an authoritarian political system so that we can have the security and hierarchical structure in place to make sure that nobody could get their hands on the button, for example. But we can also think about that with some real world examples. And so, for example, you could think about some of the apps that we develop, and you could think about whether something like Twitter or even YouTube would have been invented in a country different from our own, right? Perhaps think of dictatorial regimes and whether or not that would actually give certain arrangements of power that would allow for such artifacts to be created, right? Langdon Winner would suggest no. And so now, the final claim here is that the artifacts that we do create, they also have to work with certain arrangements of power. And so in a sense, they then perpetuate those arrangements of power. And so that's a real nuanced, complex way of looking at really kind of the day-to-day objects around us. But I hope that it really kind of gets our minds spinning, because that's what I'm interested in project number 3. I'm interested in you guys looking at objects and seeing the stories that unfold. And so in project number 3, the actual task is really straightforward. I'm asking you to choose an artifact of your choice and just explore the world that it helps create. Now, I've provided the prompt in this week's materials, and so you can see some of the details. The big idea here is that you're going to be working inductively. And when I say inductively, what I mean is that you're not going to start with a thesis about your artifact. You're not going to give me 4 or 5 claims in a row, because really you need to do some research. And so what happens is that you come to a really complex understanding of the artifact that you choose. You come to an understanding of the agendas that are embedded by doing the research. So your paper grows, and it's only at the very end of your paper that you arrive at this really kind of complex thesis. And now I've provided an example in this week's materials, and I'm actually going to ask you to do a little work with the example project so that you can see how the organization of this research paper unfolds. Now, as you guys get started, you can think about some of the brainstorming ideas that I've already helped you with. You can take a look at my comments on last week's writing journal. I know that you guys gave me some examples, and so I'll let you know the extent to which I think that that could work. Hop into potential discussion number 8. There's already been some really cool conversation in there about a variety of objects, everything from park benches to skateboarding ledges to beware of dog signs. And so the conversation has already started. And then also, I'll remind you to take a look at those questions that I provided last week. I've linked you to them this week too, because that gives you kind of a cheat sheet for asking about agendas. And so as we move forward this week, I'm really asking you guys to get started on your own projects. I want you to get an understanding of how we're going to write this paper, and then I want you guys to actually start brainstorming directions you could pursue. As always, if you have questions, let me know. Take care.